a tiny country at the heart of Europe. Yet, for centuries, the continent's greatest powers were deeply concerned with the fate of these lands. France lay to the south, the Netherlands to the north, and a rising German power to the east. Belgium stood at one of Europe's most dangerous crossroads. One day, the violation of this small nation's neutrality would help draw one of the world's greatest empires into war. But why did Belgium exist and why did it matter so much? Before Rome arrived, the lands of modern Belgium were inhabited by warrior tribes known as the Belgae. They became famous for their fierce resistance. In 57 BC, Julius Caesar's legions advanced into the region. The Belgae resisted fiercely, but eventually fell before the military power of Rome. The region became part of the Roman Empire. Roads, towns, and trade networks expanded, connecting these lands to the Roman world for centuries. As Roman power collapsed in the west, new rulers emerged. During the 5th century, the Franks gradually became the dominant force in the lands of modern Belgium. As the Frankish kingdoms expanded, Christianity spread throughout the region. A new medieval society was taking shape upon the remains of the Roman world. Over the centuries, towns, castles, and trading centers rose along the rivers. These lands were beginning their transformation into one of the wealthiest regions in Europe. As the Middle Ages progressed, Flanders experienced extraordinary economic growth. Cities such as Bruges and Ghent became major centers of European trade. Woolen cloth brought enormous wealth to the region. Wool imported from England was processed here and then sold in markets across Europe. Trade brought wealth, and wealth brought political power. The cities of Flanders were no longer ordinary settlements. They had become prizes that Europe's most powerful rulers wanted to control. During the 15th century, much of Flanders and the surrounding wealthy territories came under the control of the Dukes of Burgundy. The region was becoming part of a much greater political power. Under Burgundian rule, Bruges, Ghent, and Brussels grew even wealthier. Court, culture, art, and international trade made the region one of Europe's most prestigious centers. But in 1477, Duke Charles of Burgundy died. His daughter Mary's marriage to Maximilian of Habsburg transformed the region's destiny. The lands of future Belgium were now being drawn into the Habsburg world. At the beginning of the 16th century, these lands became one of the most valuable regions of the Habsburg world. Born in Ghent in 1500, Charles V would become one of Europe's most powerful rulers. Under Charles V, Antwerp became one of Europe's greatest centers of commerce. Ships, merchants, and wealth flowed into its harbor from across the known world. In 1555, Charles V transferred his authority to his son, Philip II. The lands of future Belgium now passed to the Spanish Habsburgs, but conflict over religion and power was about to tear the region apart. Under Philip II, the provinces of the Netherlands were increasingly governed from Madrid. Heavy taxation and stronger royal control created growing resentment in the wealthy cities. At the same time, the Protestant Reformation was spreading across Northern Europe. Philip II's Catholic policies intensified tensions, especially where Protestantism was gaining strength. In 1568, rebellion turned into open war. The 80 Years' War had begun. While the northern provinces fought for independence, the southern lands would follow a very different path. As the war continued, the divide between North and South grew deeper. The largely Protestant northern provinces resisted Spain, while the Catholic South remained largely under Habsburg rule. In 1585, Spanish forces captured Antwerp. The fall of the city became a major turning point. making the political and religious division between North and South increasingly permanent. While the North eventually emerged as the independent Dutch Republic, the South remained the Spanish Netherlands. Centuries later, these southern lands would form the foundation of modern Belgium. As Spanish power weakened, Europe was drawn into another major conflict. After the War of the Spanish Succession, the southern Netherlands passed to the Austrian Habsburgs in 1714. Under Austrian rule, Brussels and the surrounding cities continued to develop as centers of trade and production, but local privileges and traditions remained deeply important to the population. In 1789, rebellion erupted against Emperor Joseph II's centralizing reforms. The Brabant Revolution briefly brought independence, but an even greater transformation was about to arrive from France. The French Revolution shattered Europe's political order. During the 1790s, French armies advanced into the region, bringing Austrian rule to an end. In 1795, these lands were annexed by France. Old institutions were abolished, government was reorganized, and the region became a direct part of the French state. Under Napoleon, the region became a strategic part of the French Empire. But after his defeat in 1815, Europe would be redrawn and the lands of future Belgium would be united with the Netherlands. After Napoleon's defeat, Europe's great powers redrew the continent's borders. One goal was to create a strong buffer state that could prevent future French expansion to the north. In 1815, the former Austrian Netherlands was united with the northern Netherlands. The new kingdom was ruled by the Protestant King William I. But the union was troubled from the beginning. The South was largely Catholic, and its economic and political interests differed from the North. As resentment grew, the new kingdom would reach the brink of collapse within just 15 years. King William I tried to unite the country under a centralized government, but Southern Catholics increasingly resented state control over the church and the king's authoritarian rule. Economic grievances added to the tension. The industrialized South believed that its wealth and taxes were being used to serve the interests of the North. By the late 1820s, Catholics and liberals had united in opposition. By the summer of 1830, anger in Brussels had reached breaking point. The Belgian Revolution was about to begin. On the night of August 25, 1830, crowds poured into the streets of Brussels after an opera performance. Years of resentment were now exploding into open revolt. King William sent his troops into Brussels to crush the uprising, but after days of fierce street fighting, Dutch forces were forced to withdraw from the city. On October 4, 1830, the provisional government declared Belgium independent. A new state had been born at the heart of Europe, but its survival now depended on the decisions of Europe's great powers. Belgian independence threatened to alter Europe's balance of power. Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, and Russia gathered in London to decide the new nation's future. The great powers accepted Belgian independence and supported the creation of a monarchy. In 1831, German-born Prince Leopold became Leopold I, the first king of the Belgians. But King William refused to accept independence. The Dutch army invaded again in 1831, but French intervention ensured Belgium's survival. The new nation had passed its first major test. After years of dispute, the Treaty of London was signed in 1839. The Netherlands finally recognized Belgium as an independent state. One of the treaty's most important consequences was Belgium's neutral status. Europe's great powers guaranteed the independence and neutrality of the small kingdom. Belgium had become a buffer between France and the rising German power. The neutrality guaranteed that day would play a critical role 75 years later, at the outbreak of World War I. After independence, a new challenge emerged within Belgium. While most people in the north spoke Dutch, French became the dominant language of government and the country's elite. In response, the Flemish movement began demanding greater recognition for Dutch in public life. Over time, the language question became one of Belgium's most important political issues. The differences between Flemings and Walloons never completely disappeared, yet both communities continued within the same state, and this young nation was now about to become one of Europe's industrial powers. Belgium became one of the first countries in continental Europe to embrace the Industrial Revolution. Coal, iron, and textile production rapidly increased the nation's economic power. Railways connected the growing nation. In 1835, the line between Brussels and Mechelen became one of continental Europe's first public steam passenger railways. By the late 19th century, small Belgium had become one of Europe's most heavily industrialized nations. This new wealth brought power, but attention was now turning far beyond Europe, toward Africa. Under Leopold II, Belgium's story extended into Africa. The Congo became a vast colonial domain under Leopold's personal rule, marked by brutal exploitation and violence. In 1908, control of the Congo passed to the Belgian state. Meanwhile, alliances were forming, armies were expanding, and Europe's arms race was accelerating. Belgium was neutral, but geography placed it directly in the path of the coming catastrophe. In the summer of 1914, Belgium was still neutral, but beyond its frontier, German armies were preparing to move. The small nation Europe had promised to protect in 1839 was about to stand at the gateway to one of the greatest wars in human history.